So good evening, and it's lovely to see so many of you here again joining us. We do hope that come the new year we'll have some lectures back in person again. But here tonight we have a really exciting prospect that builds on the series which we've had. Whilst the series may have looked at the wider context of what we've had, here we have Tim Skelton, who will be known to many of you, a writer of the excellent book on Lutyens and the Great War. But rather than focusing on some of those big memorials, tonight we delve into the smaller graves and memorials, quite a substantial part of his work and largely undocumented or very underdocumented. So I suppose without further ado, I am going to hand over to Tim. Please put your questions in the Q&A at the bottom. As you'll have heard when the meeting was joining, the meeting has been recorded, and I will share the link to it for those who haven't been able to join or those who want to listen to it again after the talk. So yes, without further ado, over to you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Robbie, and welcome everybody. And thank you to the Trust for asking me to talk about this, which is somewhat of a passion of mine. Just by way of context, I'm a retired chartered surveyor, so I'm not an architect. And in a period of redundancy in the mid-1990s, I set out to catalogue all of the Lutyens' work, because there didn't seem to be any comprehensive list of everything that he had done. There were various lists in the memorial volumes, the catalogue to the Hayward Gallery exhibition in 1981. There's War Graves Commission list and other lists as well. And I just sat down with a fairly primitive Mac and put it all on an Excel spreadsheet, and with the view of sort of going around and visiting things as and when circumstances permitted. And I was lucky, as in my job as a charter surveyor, I did have the opportunity to go around the country. So it was easy to sort of, put in a visit in lunch hour or at the end of the day, or start early or what have you. And as I went round, I got sort of sucked into the war cemeteries, because I had an opportunity to go to the Somme with my brother and father in 1999. And that, with a following visit to Ypres the next year, that got me completely sidetracked into doing the war memorials, and the work that I'd done on the graves and memorials, the private stuff, just got kind of put to one side. But I've now had the opportunity to go back to it for this lecture, so it's quite interesting to do that. So it's as far as I'm concerned, it's going back to a lot of stuff I did in the 1990s and the early 2000s. And what is interesting is a lot of this stuff, a lot of the pictures you see tonight will be of memorials and graves that have never been published anywhere. And just to put Lutyens' work in context, the sort of work that I did for my catalogue reviewing came out with a rough figure of about 715 things that have Lutyens' name attached to it. And you can see the breakdown there. That was just a breakdown that by type that I thought was appropriate. If you actually reorder it, and you get this stage where actually the bottom four categories comprise 44% of his output in terms of things that have his name ascribed to it. I mean, what he's known for really is the houses, which is, you see, 130 at the top, and with the gardens, probably 150. So that's less than a quarter of his output is what he's known by. And yet, 44% of his work is actually connected with death in one way or another. So that's through his private memorials or war memorials or work that he did on the Western Front. And I think that's quite interesting that there's such a large number, large percentage. And when you look at the books about him, the graves and memorials very rarely get mentioned. And I mentioned the Hayward Gallery exhibition in 1981 that really brought Lutyens back to attention. I went through the catalogue for that today, and there's no mention, I don't think, of any single grave or private memorial. And yet you can see there's 116. So that's a significant number of his projects connected with death that were just not recorded. So if we sort of take this all into, bear this all in mind, that 44% of his work connected with, marking death in one way or another, take out the war memorials, war cemeteries, and that top two is what we're talking about, what I'm talking about tonight. The way to start at the Cenotaph. It's the obvious place because I think, as probably everybody will know on this call, Cenotaph is a Greek word meaning empty tomb. So if you actually look at anything described as a cenotaph, you should be able to see a tomb within it somehow. And the most famous one, obviously, in Whitehall. And if you look at the top of the cenotaph, you have there what is a chest tomb. And incidentally, the view of Whitehall there has the Lutyens barriers on the left-hand drawing, left-hand photo rather. And that is a view you see, I think, probably only at the weekends for the fortnight after Remembrance Day. So when the Whitehall is actually closed to traffic. So if you want to take that photograph, now is the ideal opportunity, or next weekend will be, probably next Sunday. So anyway, the cenotaph, grey chest tomb at the top. And where does this appear then in Lutyens' work? And the first place, well, where we actually see the actual same version as on the top of the cenotaph is here in Buscott in Oxfordshire, and it's the tomb of Harold Henderson. And when you start looking at Lutyens' work in graveyards, it's quite interesting just to go in the graveyard and see if you can spot it without knowing where it is. Often surrounded by landscaping, and here you can see the chest tomb just poking up. And there it is. Just the version that is on top of the cenotaph, a simple tomb with the recessed sides. This is a very poignant photograph for me because when I was taking these photographs, it was early in the morning prior to a meeting in Witney, and my car radio wasn't working, and went to the meeting in Witney and went on then to a meeting in the Maryhill shopping centre in Birmingham. And the clerk of works who I met there said, "Have you heard about the shooting in Dunblane?" And I hadn't. And what I realised was these two photographs were being taken actually while the shooting was going on. And it made my blood run cold when I realised the timing of it, the fact I was in a graveyard when that was happening. So I hope you don't mind me sharing that, very sort of personal memory, but I just, as I say, it made my blood run cold, and it still does now. But anyway, so that's the chest tomb on top of the cenotaph. A slight variation then in a tomb in Charlton, which is a village in Northamptonshire. And this is a tomb for Francis Smith, the Lord Birkenhead, who was a noted politician and friend of everybody, and quite a bon vivant, almost like a sort of 1920s version of Boris Johnson when you read about him. But so this, we see the added circles at either end of the side of the tomb there, and some carving on the end. And also it's worth noting the very fine typeface that I think is probably the same typeface as was developed for the war graves on the Western Front. And this is common to just about every single one of Lutyens' tombs. And also the carving is notable, which we'll come on to as we go through. A similar version, but a variant of it. This is the tomb of Lord Moncaster in Cumbria, just outside Moncaster Castle. And Moncaster is a sort of client that crops up in Lutyens' work in the late 1910s to do all where Lutyens went up to look at the possibility of various alterations to Moncaster Castle, none of which came to anything. And but he had 3 commissions with the Moncaster War Memorial, this rather elegant chest tomb, and there's a plaque inside the church that Lutyens did as well. But we can see how the tombs are becoming, more ornate, compared to the one at the Cenotaph. But interesting, the date of this, 1919. So it wasn't that his style was changing, but he just does typical architect doing different styles all the time and barely repeating one. This is a slightly simpler version, but the chest tomb of Lord Brownlow in Belton in Lincolnshire. Again, I think this was one where Lutyens was probably looking to do other work, but it never appeared. And you see here that the tomb, as well as having the engravings, the carvings on the side, has this undercut base, which is more evident here. And also you can see on this side, we'll see this again later in other tombs, the fact that part of the side is not undercut. And this matches the line of the family crest that's carved above it. Again, a similar sort of version of the chest tomb, slightly narrower one here. This is Sir Frederick Palmer in Crowhurst, Surrey. And it's kind of interesting to see what thread there is between the clients. I mean, sometimes, as with Moncaster, we know that Lutyens is doing other work because it's recorded, even if it might not have come to fruition. But here, Sir Frederick Palmer, who's a noted civil engineer and did work in the London dockyards, London Docklands, amongst other things, and bridges, and was the founder of Rendell, Palmer and Tritton, the structural engineers who still exist now. There's no obvious evidence of any connection with Lutyens here. There's nothing that I could find where Palmer and Lutyens worked together on anything. But it probably just came through Lutyens' other professional contacts, or his work in, through knowing people through clubs and things like that. And then again, a more ornate version for William Baylier in Windlesham in Surrey. And this is like 10 years later than the other one, but we see the chest tomb, but this time on a more elaborate base, and then with the Doric columns above and the shallow dish on top of it. Baylier was a character, again, no idea how he came into Lutyens' orbit, but he was an Australian financier who spent all his time, basically his working life in Australia, and then his daughter brought him over to the UK late in life. It was I think, reading between the lines, quite a fascinating character, a reputed millionaire. But when he died, his estate was only worth 60,000 Australian pounds. So there's obviously some smart financing going on somewhere. And behind it, just to the left, you can see another similar tomb. This is for a lady called Julia Clark. Again, I don't know anything about her, couldn't find anything, but you have these two Lutyens tombs together in Windlesham, and I suspect they must be a connection somehow through friendship, but I have no idea what it is, I'm afraid. And then the slightly more elaborate version, this time inside for Aubrey Herbert. This is in Brushford in Somerset, where Lutyens built designed a chapel for the tomb. And with the statue, or the carving of Aubrey Herbert on top of it. It's very elegant tomb and carving. There were one or two, particularly Moncaster War Memorial, that has a carving on top of the cenotaph, but it is a fairly anonymous draped figure rather than an actual person. I don't know who carved this, I'm afraid. We know, excuse me, one or two sculptors' names that I'll refer to later, but I don't know anything about Aubrey Herbert, other than he was the brother of Lord Carnarvon. You see the Carnarvon name on the dedication plaque there. This is the Carnarvon who discovered the grave of Tutankhamun. And then a bigger, bulkier version. Now we've got a square tomb, and this is to the Hudson family in Hampstead in London. Edward Hudson, who I'm sure most of you will know, greatly advanced Lutyens' career through publishing his work in Country Life, which Hudson owned, but also Hudson commissioned buildings from Lutyens, notably Deanery Gardens at Somme, and it's the main one, and obviously Lindisfarne Castle as well. But this is the tomb for the Hudson family. Not interestingly, Edward Hudson himself. So I think he was cremated, but I don't know where he ended up, which is quite strange. But I couldn't find any inscription to Hudson himself on the tomb when I visited it. Also, this is worth noting if you just look at the way that the base is undercut, which I referred to earlier, and how the bits that aren't undercut line up with the panels above. If you then look further at it and imagine looking at it in plan view, you can see the bits that aren't undercut form a cross, which is sort of a very sort of clever, witty use of the design of the tomb. Away from that type of chest tomb to the more unusual ones, this is Vicar Milner, who Lutyens would have known through his work in South Africa, and this is in Salehurst in Sussex, and just a very, very stark block, square block, again with the you can just see the panels on the sides there, just slightly cut into the side of the hill. And I mentioned the planting earlier, and you can see the three conifers by the look of them there. So again, the tomb here becoming even more abstract. And in a similar sort of vein, the square shape. This is the tomb for the Mckenna family, Mckenna, who commissioned a house in Mells from Lutyens. And again, you've got the landscape and the four trees around the tomb, and this very sort of simple blocky tomb. The design late in Lutyens' career, as you can see there. But it's a very, very stark and very unusual, this sort of chest tomb. More elaborate still is the tomb for Maud Baring on Lambay Island in Ireland, where you can see the chest tomb in front of this rather splendid wall with urns. You can't quite see the one on the right hand side because it's out of the picture, and the semicircular recessed bit at the top with planting on it. And I just put an inset picture off to the top left of the screen. You can see the very fine detail of the tool work on the some of the stone. A beautiful detail, a very serene setting for this the grave of Maud Baring, and the words just carved into the top there above the posy, quiet, very simple. But then sort of finally on the chest tombs, and then what I've done in sort of describing them, I've used tomb to describe something that is larger than just a simple plate, either a plaque or something else. So even though they might not necessarily probably have the bodies in them, but I think they might have the bodies underneath. But this is probably one of the first things that Lutyens did, a tomb, unlike anything else we've seen to date. This is the tomb for Agnes Chapman, who was the wife of Lutyens' client for Crooksbury. Yeah, this is something, as we saw with Hudson, although not Hudson himself, but and the Mckennas, that Lutyens, not only was he designing houses for people, he was designing graves for them as well, which is a strange sort of concept of service for an architect. But again, you see the pictures of the privet. I think that's privet there, around the tomb. Most unusual graves, probably in terms of location, in this sort of grave are the graves of Edward and Tom Thynne in Findon, which are kind of in the middle of nowhere, just on some private land that the family own, called Muntham Clump. One of the younger Thynne, who died, was found in a locked room with a gun. So there's various tales as to whether he committed suicide or it was an accident. You can draw your own conclusions. But because there was a suspicion of suicide, he wasn't allowed to be buried in consecrated ground. So he was buried on some private land that the family owned. And they then, the family disinterred his brother Edward from the grave in where he was in the churchyard in Findon, and moved him to be next to his brother. And this is a sort of, there are now a number of family graves in this sort of overgrown, rather romantic enclosure on the side of a hill outside Findon. But it's a very strange block of stone that Lutyens designed, with just a slight curve on the top of it. Again, in this the sort of block, or in the block mood, the noted opera singer Conchita Supervier Rubinstein in the Liberal Jewish Cemetery in Willesden. The main part here of the tomb is balanced on 4 turtles, which apparently was her lucky mascot. And this is quite interesting because she was excuse me, I spoke to one of the family because I was trying to track the tomb down. I managed to track down one of the families a number of years ago, and she was telling me the story that she was a Catholic, although she'd married into a Jewish family. And when she died, the family found out she'd converted to Judaism, I think in the final week of her life, and hadn't told anybody. And it caused a complete schism in the family, which only sort of recently, well, when I was speaking to the lady, which was the 1990s, was only, I think, with the passing of the generation, was starting to heal. But I mean, a lovely gravestone, quite wide. Lutyens designed it. Again, I've no trace of any connection, no sniff of anything. But again, this is unlike anything he's done, not illustrated in any books. We do know the turtles are familiar from the Irish, there's a garden, Hayward, that Lutyens did in Ireland that has fountains with water spouting out of turtles' mouths. So it was something that Lutyens had designed used before. But again, a very elegant simple and stylish tomb. Also, elsewhere in another Jewish cemetery, this sort of block tombs for the Beddington brothers, who died 10 years apart. One died in a skiing accident, and I can't remember. Oh, the other died of tuberculosis. Very sad. But this was a design that Lutyens used on a number of occasions. There's a picture of a tomb like this, the stone for it, still in the UK, I believe. It's in the memorial volumes, which was the tomb for Sir John Hackett. I think John Hackett, who was buried in New York, and so the stone was obviously taken out to New York. And also similar designs were used for tombs in Australia of Dame Nellie Melba and Sidney Meyer. So having done the blocks, going down now into simple sort of slab tombs. A very early one here for Julia Jekyll in the church at Busbridge, where there's obviously a lot of Lutyens work, and Julia was the mother of Gertrude, and you can see, you know, it's completely different from the tomb slabs that we've seen before. Far more probably elaborately moulded around the side, you can see. More simpler version, sort of 40, 50 years later, is the grave of the Duchess of Sutherland at Dunrobin Castle, where we see a very, a very flat slab with the coat of arms, the inscription on the top. Is one of the features of seeing a lot of these, particularly where they're laid horizontally, is that the carving of the names can be difficult to see, and obviously, you know, graves. As you see here, a lot of moss growing on, there's ivy and discoloration, what have you, so sometimes the inscriptions can be difficult to read. This again, we see the way the undercutting takes place to leave the cross established in the elevations. And similar here, this is almost one of the most humble of the graves in St Pancras Cemetery, in amongst, you know, this huge cemetery. Slightly more elaborate top. Ellen Barclay, I have no idea who she is, I'm afraid. But in amongst all the everything that's going on in the cemetery, you can see around, you know, all the confusion of other slabs, other graves, and this rather elegant horizontal slab by Lutyens. So we've kind of done the chest tombs, gone down to the slabs, going back up now. The use of the cross in some of the graves, which he did, as we'll see. These are the Maximilian and Charlotte Dallison in Plaxtal. This was again a Lutyens client where he did alterations for them, and each one of the pair has their own small chest tomb, and in the middle a commemorative cross, which those of you who are familiar with Lutyens' work will know that that is the cross that he designed for use in war memorials in villages. And he also used the same cross and a sort of similar arrangement with for the tomb of Viscount Wimborne in Ashby St Ledgers, where we have the notable alterations that Lutyens did to the house itself, and also there's a wonderful bridge there that Lutyens designed. But again, we have the grave harking back really to the sort of cenotaph type design. You've got the carvings on the end, the two roundels, and then the cross set on a three-step base with an undercut base. And just an example there of the carving on either end of the tomb. Beautiful work. And finally, another cross, which is almost a non-cross. And I know I keep saying it. These are things that aren't known about. The Lutyens did. This is the Viscount Ronda in Llanwern. It's actually quite difficult to photograph this because, as you can see, the power lines running across the screen there. But quite why, again, he was a politician involved in the. He was the food controller during World War I. But quite why the connection with Lutyens, I don't know. But we have this lovely, very minimal cross at the top, and it's notable enough to be recorded in Pevsner, one of the more recent editions, but not attributed to Lutyens because the Lutyens attribution isn't known. But again, a beautiful, very, very stark, very simple cross. And then other crosses, more obvious ones. They've got Mary Lutyens on the right, and which is very plain and no obvious sort of involvement of Lutyens at all. There's not. It's very just simple, say simple and plain to his mother Mary, and then we've got Derek on the left. Was one of 5 nephews of Lutyens to die in the war, and the bronze RAF wings with the bronze plaques around the bottom. And you can see on the left, you can see the reverse of the photo on the right. You can just see the photo of Mary Lutyens cross. And then another sort of different version of the cross altogether, down to Stockbridge, Herbert Johnson and Marshcourt. Johnson paid for 2 war memorials in the Lutyens designed in Stockbridge and King Somborne, and his wife, who had done a lot of work during the war and looking after troops, and you can see the inscription there on the left. And she was Lutyens designed a cross for her in the local cemetery with the draped olive wreath, or sort of laurel wreath rather, on around the cross arms, on a undercut base, you can see, and then on 3 steps of slightly different height. And Lutyens also designed her grave as well as this memorial cross, which is on the right. A fairly simple sort of slab, but then with more sort of intricate carving at the bottom, and the sun on the reverse, which I've just put the inset picture of at the top there. Again, these are things that Stockbridge is well known about, and obviously everything that Lutyens did there. But the war memorials now obviously recorded, but the grave and the memorial less so well known. But I think they are known about locally, or the crosses. Now, whether people have picked up the grave as well, I don't know. And this is a simple slab by to Sir Saxton Noble, who is one of these people who had lots of discussions with Lutyens about commissioning things, but it never actually happened that they got anything. They actually did a commission together, and this was carved by somebody whose name I wrote down. I'll come to you at the end with this, but sorry, yes, it's a chap called John Drake. And it's one of the lovely things about research is that one comes up with all sorts of interesting links. And while I was putting this together, this talk, we'll come on to it later, but I found a something on a website for St Paul's Cathedral about a sculptor called John Drake, who had an involvement with Lutyens, which we'll come on to. And someone, because of the way the article was written, it was reference to his grandson who was researching John Drake's life. And I contacted him over the weekend, and we had a lovely telephone conversation yesterday. And the gentleman who's the grandson who was telling me about John Drake, who he got some letters where he referred to Lutyens and the design of this particular memorial, but he didn't know where it was, or he didn't know it existed. So I was able to send Frank Dumbleton, it was, who, the photos to confirm that this existed. And he was rather pleased, because you'll see on the grave that Noble was related to Isambard Kingdom Brunel, I think, which is a nice connection he was happy with. But there's a sculptor called John Drake who we'll come on to later. And this more simpler version of the slab is to Hazel Lavery, who was the wife of the painter Sir John Lavery. This is in Putney Vale Cemetery. Lavery was she was involved with Michael Collins, the IRA leader. Whether it was romantically or not is unknown, but she was a close friend of his. This is in Putney Vale Cemetery, and this is one of those wonderful things that, as I was looking at the grave, I took a step back, and you can see her gravestone there, just off centre onto the right. And if you look to the right, you'll see a gravestone, obviously not by Lutyens, but it's David Horner, the youngest son of John Stuart Horner of Mells. So it's not by Lutyens, but by complete chance, the gravestone of somebody relative of one of Lutyens' clients, just basically in the adjoining grave plot. Just a whimsical thing that appealed to me. Different. And the Francis and John and their son Mark, who died tragically early. You see how different these are to the Mckenna grave, where we had that rather bold square tomb. These are very more traditional grave slabs. And also, if anybody's really interested in Lutyens' tombs, the sort of ground zero, really, the place to go is Nebworth, the church there, and there's Lutyens' tombs all over the place. And these are two of the Lutyens' nannies. Well, certainly Nanny Sleeth is a nanny, it's actually known as Nanny Sleeth, and I believe Martha Butler was a nanny as well. And the Nanny Sleeth tombstone is the one on the left, with the portraits of the Lutyens' children, to whom she was the nanny, and at the top. And that's where Robert Lutyens' ashes are buried as well. You just see the slab on the bottom to the left of the tombstone. I thought it's quite interesting that his ashes are buried with his nanny. More interesting version of a, which is, I've never seen anything like this before. This is the wooden headboard marking the grave of Francis Mclaren, just next to the Gertrude Jekyll tomb, which you see on the left, which we'll come back to later. It was Francis Mclaren. He married into the Jekyll family, and he was the MP for Spalding. And when he died, his wife basically commissioned Lutyens for the Spalding Memorial, which is one of my favourites. There's a wonderful story attached to it, which I won't go into now. But this sort of wooden headboard was commissioned, and I think this probably is not here anymore. It was obviously, being, even though it's oak, it suffered deterioration, and the family were concerned about this, so they've taken the decision to move it up to a museum in Scotland, near where Mclaren died in a flying accident at Montrose, and they're going to replace it with a Portland stone version of the this wooden one. I'm not quite sure where we are on this at the moment, because I know that the Trust was concerned about this, and it's very difficult sort of discussion about what to do where something is deteriorating, and what do you do? You know, does it lose its significance by being moved away from here? Should it have been in a museum here, or Spalding, which was one of my thoughts, is where he was the MP, or as the family have decided that it should be in Montrose. But I think that's where it's going to, and there will be a Portland stone version of this, so we'll follow that one with interest. He also designed war memorial tablets in churches, and we have two here. The one on the right, Saxton Noble, his son Mark. We saw his Saxton's grave a few slides ago in Bath Easton, but also on the left, this one to Brigadier Miller, which is actually quite interesting, because and it's one of the thrills or frustrations of being a researcher, is that in the memorial volumes, this is described as being in Charlton in Oxfordshire. And so I went along to the church at Charlton, making sure it was open, went inside, and couldn't believe my eyes, because it was not there at all. And I scoured the walls. I thought, am I going mad? Is there a private chapel? But no, just nothing remotely. So wrote to the vicar and said, oh no, it's not in Charlton. It's in Forest Hill, which is another place altogether. But at least it existed, so, and haven't been removed. But as well, we've got these two of a number of wall tablets that he did. Another one, two here are interesting because they have to fit around other family memorials. This is the one on the right to Maria Earle, which is in Nebworth. And you can see Lutyens did the stone slab, and I think the laurel garland that then goes over the one low onto a family. And on the left to John Leighton in Alberbury in Shropshire, with the propeller of his the plane where he was shot down. And as I was up there photographing it, I was there was someone in the church I was speaking to who was I think a member of the family, and knew the story about the memorial. And apparently there was a kind of knock on the door at the house one day back in, I don't know, the end of the war. There's some people here saying, we've got the propeller for your son's plane here. Do you want it? Well, obviously they did want it, and they weren't expecting it, but they rather cleverly sort of put it on the wall of the church where it complements the plaque. But Lutyens did quite a few plaques like this. Also, larger things, the Philipson mausoleum, as it's described as in Golders Green, which is well known, with the pierced grille around it, in this sort of Indian style. And inside you see the two shrink wrapped as they are now urns containing the ashes of the Philipsons. It is described as a mausoleum, but to me a mausoleum actually contains bodies, and really this is I think a columbarium, because it just has ashes. But it's probably too well known as the mausoleum now to change that. But if one is being a pedant, that's what it should be. I was in sort of researching about the Phillipsons, again, there's no Lutyens connection that I could discover. And this was built for Phillipson's wife, who died after they'd been married 6 years. He then went on to remarry, but asked that his ashes go in the tomb with his first, in the columbarium with his first wife, which quite what the second wife thought of that, I don't know. But quite interesting discussions, no doubt, or conversations around it. But also the thing correctly described as being a columbarium, the Hannon columbarium in Wargrave in Berkshire. And I think the connection here is because Nicholas Hannon was an architect in the Lutyens office. So I think that's where the commission came from for Lutyens to design this. Number then of moving away from the graves, etc., to just in standalone memorials. This is in Tavistock Square. Louisa Aldrich Blake was a noted surgeon, and this rather lovely sort of memorial in Tavistock Square, just sort of tucked off the road, but with two busts of her, identical busts on either side of the memorial. He did equestrian statues, the one on the left, King Edward VII, and one of Lady Godiva in Coventry, which was completed after his death, but it is very clear that the plinth was designed by him, and it's obvious, you see, having seen of the work so far, you can see the Lutyens connection. Lady Godiva herself was by Reed Dick, William Reed Dick, who worked with Lutyens on a number of sculptures. Then we've got the memorial in Windsor to King George VI, which takes the form of a couple of fountains and a tablet in the middle. The fountains in Trafalgar Square for Admirals Beatty and Jellicoe. Lovely fountains with the sculptures again, and then a memorial to Lord Chalesmore in Embankment Gardens, London, where we have a little fountain, a small rill, and a long wall with a coat of arms on top. And the back of this is on the Embankment Road itself is the Belgian War Memorial. So it's doing two things together. But that wasn't designed by Lutyens, it's just the two coincide. But a lovely little private garden. Quite why Lord Chalesmore has a memorial, I don't know. He was a leader of, a chairman of London County Council at one stage. Whether that entitled him to a plot of land, I don't know. In Leicester, one of the most elaborate memorials was Sir Jonathan North, who was a Lord Mayor and a all-round good egg of Leicester, helped fund Leicester War Memorial. When his wife Kate died, he commissioned 2 sets of memorial gates, which this is one set, and the lovely one on the left. Well, both of these have turnstiles, which are rather splendid, and this lovely wrought iron screen, excuse me, here that spans between 2 buildings that Lutyens designed subsequently. Beautiful memorial. I think this is kind of quite well known as being by Lutyens, but not illustrated as such. The War Memorial gets featured because of its size, but not necessarily, and as do the buildings might appear, but not the actual gate. Back to Mells, a couple of memorials to Mark Horner. We saw his grave earlier. This is a small little shelter, a lovely little sort of triangular building with stone slate roof, and he did Lutyens did a small well for him as well, and this was a device that Lutyens used, because having seen it here, I went up to Walton where he did work, and I was just sort of going around looking at the buildings that he did there, the conversion, and then across the road there's a little wellhead there which had this same design. So I thought, oh, that must be by Lutyens then. No record of it being by him, but clearly I think it must be, given that the two are more or less identical. He did the memorial to Henrietta Barnett, the promoter of Hampstead Garden suburb. Again, this is a fairly simple, with the sort of pillar in the middle with a wreath on top, and then 4 columns and the wrought ironwork, the lamp going over the top. We've got sculptures. I mean, you know, what you'll understand, I think, by the time we finish, which we are coming to an end, is just the variety of work that Lutyens did. In this case, a memorial to Surgeon Lord Moynihan, who's in the Leeds Infirmary. So Lutyens didn't do the sculpture, obviously, but the setting here, and he did this a number of these. And just thought that I suppose that Lutyens was the person to go to. This is fascinating. He did the memorial rotunda for Sir James Caird in the National Maritime Museum, and Caird basically funded the National Maritime Museum. And this was a fascinating thing. I came across this when doing research actually for this talk, and if you'll bear with me, I can do no better than read out something from a book called Of Ships and Stars by a gentleman called Kevin Littlewood. And this is about the genesis of this memorial. As the Office of Works sought to cope with the complexities of the project, this is the National Maritime Museum, a new element was introduced with proposals for the Caird Rotunda. It began as a simple plan to commission a bust of Sir James Caird as a gesture of thanks to the saviour of the Victory and a patron of the museum. Caird sat for the bust in the latter part of 1935. Having completed the modelling, by January 1936, the sculptor, Sir William Reid Dick, asked Sir Edwin Lutyens to design a pedestal. Instead, Lutyens produced plans for the remodelling of the library vestibule where the bust was to be replaced, the walls and floor of which were now to be of marble. Caird was not averse to the marble palace, but the chief exec of the museum argued against it on the grounds it would require lighting all year round, and he urged Reid Dick and Lutyens to redesign the space. I only hope that we may not find ourselves faced with something worse, Lord Stanhope observed. A dome skylight was incorporated into the new plan, and this was accepted. This rotunda, lined in Thiepval and golden travertine marble and incorporating a fluted frieze with Caird's coat of arms, cost £5,760. The expense was, quotes, one of the results of employing Sir Edwin Lutyens, whose fees came to £2,000. Now, that seems astonishing for something in the 1930s. And I wondered if that is a kind of reinterpretation to 1998 of when the book was published. Where this quote came from, I don't know. Anyway, we continue. Even sculpting the bust became an epic. Reid Dick wanted to produce the work in a green hue, but Caird and Callender, the chief exec, averse to such modernist touches, persuaded him to cast it in deep bronze. You can imagine the astonishment of Caird and myself, wrote Callender, when the thing came out green. We protested mildly to Reid Dick, who remarked genially, Lutyens and I thought that green was better. Lord and Lady Stanhope, viewing the bust at the Royal Academy Summer Exhibition in 1936, thought the chin too weak, the head insignificant, and they were distressed by the green cast. Reid Dick paid little attention to their complaints. Stanhope was outraged at the sculptor's behaviour and wanted to withhold payment to teach Reed Dick a lesson, but they'd already paid the bill. Ultimately, a marble bust was produced, and which we see there, and the bronze that was the green that nobody liked is actually elsewhere in the museum. But just, you go there and look at it, you don't realise all the turmoil that went into that. But just a lovely little tale. And that there you see the bust, the skylight that Lutyens introduced, and the detail of the frieze, which is very much like sort of picking up stuff from Delhi. He did everything, Lutyens. So this was a doorway for Lord Knutsford at the Memorial London Hospital. Lord Knutsford was I think chairman of the hospital trustees or something. I think this still exists. The hospital has been relocated, but the building is being turned into the Tower Hamlets town hall. So I hope this is being retained. The Edward Hornemore Memorial in Mells, which I'm sure most of you, if you're Lutyens fans, will know of already. The horse modelled by Sir Alfred Munnings, who was a painter, and I think this was the only sculpture he did, but very splendid it was too. The Harmsworth, these are kind of one-offs now. The Harmsworth family grave, the newspaper baron in East Finchley, a rare occasion where you see Lutyens' name, if you see it on the right, actually appearing on the back of the memorial. This is a tomb such as Charles Barry, related to J.M. Barry, the author of Peter Pan, a great friend of Lutyens, and this is up in Dundee. Again, a very stark, pure grey granite, almost a cenotaph, really. The sort of tomb at the top, very angular. Again, not in any Lutyens book, but deserves to be. And the inscriptions there that you see in granite takes inscription far better than Portland stone does, because it endures better. And then we have the memorial bridge that Lutyens designed at Eton for Dennis Finch Hatton, who died in a plane crash in Africa. He's a close friend of Ellen Blixen and buried in South Africa, but his friends, he'd been to Eton and wanted to do something at Eton in his honour. Then coming to an end, we've got the Fairhaven Memorial Lodges at Runnymede, commissioned by Lord Fairhaven, well, actually commissioned by his wife. And Fairhaven died having been promoted to be ennobled in the New Year's honours in, I think it was 1930, but they were delayed because the king was ill. And in the intervening period, Lord Fairhaven died, but they allowed him to be called Lord Fairhaven as if he had been ennobled. And there are two lodges, his wife and son then bought the land at Runnymede and gave it to the nation, and commissioned Lutyens to do 4 buildings, the 2 larger ones here, and the other end of Runnymede, so behind us, are 2 smaller sort of pepper pots, but lovely sort of Lutyens buildings and very fine markers alongside the road. And the grave of the Jekyll family, and Gertrude Jekyll, who was obviously instrumental into Lutyens' career. That's her grave on the left hand of the 3, with her 2 parents, and inside the grave the Berigenia, that's one of her favourite flowers. And to end, one of the thrills of doing research, especially into a new area, is that you come across the unexpected, and this is completely unexpected. It's the burial enclosure of the Fletcher family, and in Avoch, Ross and Cromarty in northern Scotland. And there's no evidence I can find here of any connection again with Lutyens. But when James Fletcher, who had commissioned a mansion from William Flockhart, when he died, his wife commissioned Lutyens to design this wonderful structure. Unknown. I mean, I know the Trust knew about it, and it kind of is recorded, but not, again, in any Lutyens building. And this is kind of an astonishing grave which became the grave for the husband when he died, as well, in the woods up above the Flockhart House. And this is what it was like when I went to visit it in the late 1990s, all completely overgrown. The cross that was on by the door gateway had been laid horizontally in the middle of the enclosure. And it was all overgrown in the trees, and I think looking rather romantic in its own way, but astonishing, absolutely astonishing, wonderful, wonderful design. And the mansion was demolished. The family moved out because there were no successors. And just when I was doing this, I knew that potentially there'd been some refurbishment going on, so that there has been some clearance of the surrounding forest, which is good in its own way, I think, because the memorial now is being treated with more dignity, which I think is how it's designed, with an avenue going up to it. Whether it will be restored or not, I don't know, because it depends on, I guess, public funds. I mean, it is a listed structure in Scotland, but a wonderful memorial grave. And finally, Lutyens himself died in 1944, as we all know. He's buried in St Paul's Cathedral, and we have the plaque here on the left. I rather suspect he must have designed this himself. If we look for clues, he designed a plaque for church in Bitton in Somerset on the right for John Parker, as you can read there, was involved in the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. And the corner detail you will see is not the same, but he did design a plaque for his son-in-law, whose name is escaping me for a minute. It'll come back soon, I guess. In Sussex, where they lived, and the plaque is identical to the one that was designed for the one that's got Lutyens' ashes in it, because the corner detail is the same, but it's a rubbish photo, which is why I haven't used it today. So that's the plaque under which Lutyens' ashes were buried, and this plaque. Again, the work on that was done by the gentleman I referred to earlier, who did the work at Bath Easton in Somerset. John Drake. So John Drake did the bronze plaque on the top there, and presumably carved the whole thing as well, and I'm fairly certain it's I would guess, to a Lutyens design. So there we have it. It's been quite a skate through. I haven't obviously covered all the work that Lutyens did, but I hope you realise that what you actually have seen is a wide variety of Lutyens' work that will help, I think, put his work into more context. It's obviously not as important and splendid as the houses, but it is part of his work that isn't known. And hopefully it is more widely known now. So back to you as host, Robbie. Thank you.
Well, as you rightly say, that was a absolutely fantastic insight into a far too understudied area of his work. As you said at the beginning, really quite a comprehensive part of his output. But the way that you took us through there was good, wonderful structure, and it was amazing to see the way that he treated these different scales of monuments and tombs, the elegant, simple, stylish and refined, I think as you said, but also to see some of the, I think, familiar motifs that either were tested here, tested here first and then used in his buildings, or perhaps the other way around. It was very interesting for me to be introduced to some of the other hallmarks of his tombs, which I will certainly enjoy a lot more as I go around exploring this further. So yeah, a big thank you for a very, very interesting talk so far. If people have any questions, please put them in the Q&A. I have got a couple, and I suppose, as I just said, do you think that the motifs that he created here were tested here and then put into his buildings, or perhaps the other way around?
I think he just had like all architects, they have a kit of parts, and they just use them at will as circumstances and whim dictate, I think. And it's difficult. We don't know what was in his mind. There's very little description of these in the letters and things. I mean, it's just part of his work that isn't researched. So I don't know. I mean, the railings there,
right, yeah.
Come from Delhi, don't they? And other things as well. We saw them, the Golders Green crematorium, and other things as well. So no architect likes to waste their design. So
maximum efficiency, as we would like to say. I think it's interesting also just to reflect on that the Jekyll work at the beginning, and then obviously as he becomes better known, the quantity of work that then is produced on these gravestones, but just seeing how his maturity through perhaps those two images was, I thought, a very interesting insight that you provided.
Yeah. I mean, and I think this kind of really really intrigues me, because I know Baker also designed a number of graves, but not anywhere near the number that Lutyens did. And I wonder, has Lutyens actually designed more graves than anybody else, any other architect? I just don't know. Now, Norman Foster doesn't design graves. Now, I know a lot more people are cremated and things, but I think Foster designed the police memorial in London. But this was for the leading architect of his day, just to design graves. Well, design graves for people. I mean, I just find it all completely intriguing. It is.
That leads quite nicely into one of the questions that we've got, which is at the time of their creation, were the various memorials and tombs known by the general public as being by Lutyens? So I suppose, building on what you just said, with his reputation, obviously, for the architecture, did that also stem into the memorials? Do we know?
Sorry, I can't see the question.
No, I was just reading it out. It's been sent to me separately from here. It's asking, at the time of their creation, were the various memorials and tombs known by the general public as being by Lutyens?
I think some of them might be, but I mean, I would guess they would be known to the people and the families who commissioned them and things. Mm. But the occasional reports appear in the paper. I think like the nuts for the doorway in the hospital. That was the report in the paper referred to that. But I mean, what is actually fascinating is that when I started this research, I mean, there was an internet, but there wasn't Professor Google. And, I spent quite a lot of time writing letters to vicars and saying, is so-and-so in your churchyard? Yeah. The one in Oxford. And I mean, now you can go onto Google and do searching, and particularly something like the British newspapers, which are increasingly online now. When I did, I was involved in helping Historic England look at Lutyens' war memorials for listing. And, you could find local reports there about unveiling ceremonies which might mention Lutyens. So, there's probably the opportunity to go back as more and more papers become available to, just Google the occupant and the date of death and just see if any reports come up with about Lutyens. But I mean, there will be cases like, in the situation here with the Fletchers, where I suspect the finishing of the work is substantially later than the date of the interment or the date of the funeral.
Yeah,
so,
a good point just to be put in the chat, saying that perhaps his World War I memorials also, or the reputation from that, brought further peacetime commissions. I think is a very good point. And I mean, it's odd though, because if you are, as you say, the leading architect of your generation, for a client to come and ask you to design a tomb is a very odd leap to make, and therefore there must have been a degree of reputation that it was actually something that was possible to have done. I mean, yes, if there was the family connections that were there, then that obviously makes sense. Conversations come up and they get made, but there must have been some not advertising, but awareness that it was a possibility.
Yeah, well, I suppose also, I mean, we know that Lutyens like designing little things, or sketching, like the Queen Mary doll's house, which doesn't have a tomb in it. But I can imagine these sorts of things appealed to him. So, he got, his clients, they did the house, did the war memorial in the grave, complete service for certain people, and it's just interesting, and it's just so frustrating that so many of the drawings were thrown away because he wasn't in fashion. And like with the memorials, this is just an area that has not been researched because it's just pushed to one side. This one we got in front of us. Why is that not in every Lutyens book?
Well, hopefully that answers the question that's just been asked by Simon for you. I'm conscious of time, and you've been hugely generous with yours this evening, and in clearly putting together a hugely comprehensive talk. And I know that it will have been as interesting for all those on this call. And of course, it's always a sadness of them that we can't join a huge round of applause to say thank you to you. But on behalf of everyone who's here, thank you very much indeed.